Welcome to part 2 of how to narrow a Ford 8.8 rear axle. Now, if you're not familiar with what happened in part 1, we went through the full strip down measurements and brought us up to the point where we're going to slice this thing off and we're going to stick it all back together and make one narrowed assembly. Now, if you didn't watch part 1 or you missed some of it, you need to know some of the information about how we got up to this point. That is your video card. That's where you should be clicking to go get brought up to speed on that one. So, now that we're on part 2, let's cut this beast apart. Let's stick it all back together. Let's finish this thing up. Now before anything can actually be cut down here, we need to make ourselves a clocking reference so that way the axle tubes actually line back up again when we weld them back together after we cut this section out. So take yourself a marker and a straight edge and then just draw a line straight across. Grab a hold of the grinder with the cutoff wheel on it and trace it out. Make sure it's deep enough to where you can see it again, and if you do run off a little bit like this, don't worry about it. There are a few things that I'm going to focus on while I am making these cuts. One, make sure that your blade or your cutoff wheel is perpendicular to the axle tube. Make sure you don't go at an angle this way, side to side, or in a different direction that is off point or off kilter or going to actually lead it around. You want them as straight as possible, which means take your dear sweet time. Don't try to cut the entire thing off at once. Just slowly work your way around and stay as close to that tape edge as possible without actually cutting the tape. Do not cut into the tape. The tape is there for a guide. Make sure that you stay near it, but not on it, okay? Because remember the golden rule, we can always take metal away, but we can't necessarily always put it back on. And if you take too much out of this tube, game over. So make sure that you're nice, straight, even, neat. Take your time. If I didn't say that enough, take your time, okay? Next off, you want to pay attention to the process in which you're going to cut. Make sure that you cut the outside piece off before you cut the inside piece off. It's a lot easier if you do it that way. And if you have a buddy or a friend coming by to help you out with this one, make sure that they're holding on to this before it falls off. In my case, I'm just going to let it hit the deck and I'll worry about cleaning it up later. But cut the outside of the tube off before the inside to make your life just a little bit easier. So let me flip this around here real quick so you can get a good visual. Remember before we talked about the clocking reference and how important it is? Now, since that was cut in a straight line, our axle tube will be clocked correctly. We don't have to worry about it being up here, down there, or the brake calipers not lining up correctly on each side, all the rest of that good stuff. Now these are cut with the grinder, so we have to actually clean all of these up and focus in on getting it nice and straight and even again. And I'm also going to throw a bevel on here before we weld it. But I want to first make sure that everything's nice and cleaned up on the inside and the outside. Then we'll set up our jig here to make sure that we get everything locked in place, take our measurements, and find out if we need to take off any more. All right, now I didn't take too much off of there, just enough off the face to kind of clean it up and take some of the burrs and slag and all the rest of that stuff away. We don't want to take too much off because if we take too much off, we're going to end up trying to bridge a gap and Well, ideally that's not the target. The target is the measurement that we took earlier, which is 2 7/8 of an inch, making this 17 3/8 of an inch long to match the opposite side. That's what we're after, so don't take too much metal away or get too greedy in the beginning. Just face it off, make it nice and clean, so that way there's a even and neat fit up on it. Now we have to actually place this in here to take a measurement on it. Now we're not really going to get the most accurate results trying to hold it up here like this. That's just flat out not going to happen. Now we can use axle jigs. If you wanted to spend the money on getting an axle jig, that's fine. You can go ahead and grab one. They work great. But an alternative to that, if you don't have the money or don't want to spend it, is a piece of 3-inch channel iron, or better known as C-channel or C-stock. Now these are cut to about 14 inches in length, and I'm going to stick one on the top, I'm going to stick one on the bottom, grab a hold of a big clamp, which these are 8-inch clamps. We'll stick it on there nice and snug. Now don't crank it down too far right now, because we still have to have enough to slide this section of the axle in. Now I'm going to line them up with the clocking references just for good measure here. Now they're lined up right where they need to be. I'm going to take another clamp and clamp down the other side. And now I'm going to snug these up nice and tight just to make sure that they are both as tight as they can be to line this complete axle up. That ought to do it. Now I'm going to take the same measurement as we did before, starting with the outside edge of the differential housing to the flange, outside edge of the flange there. I'm looking at 17 7/16. This side, 17 7/16, the same. So that means that we're a 1/16 of an inch off of our target, or a 1/16 of an inch away. Now looking at this, we have to take a 1/16 of an inch off of each one of them and get it the 1/16 of an inch closer. On the back side here, I have a little bit of a gap. On the front side, or the side that you guys can see, it's not much of a gap. So I know that about a 1/16 of an inch can come out of here, and pretty much the same around all areas and all sections of it. I can get all that cut out of there, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Nice and easy. Do this as many times as you need to in order to get that measurement as close as possible. Don't get greedy on it, because we don't want to fill in a gap, and we obviously can't make it too short, because we end up scrapping the whole project. Take a measurement. Oh, we're just a slight fraction over 17 3/8 of an inch as our target. So right here, exact same. I mean, we're talking just a minute amount. So I'm going to take this off again and just take a little tiny bit off of there. Now, I can't stress this enough. Make sure you're picky. And I mean very picky. If you have to do this 100 times until you get it just right, do it 100 times. Final measurement, my gut's telling me I got it right on the nose. 17 3/8. 17 3/8. Dead on it. I love it. That means this video is not going to be as long. Now, in order to get a good solid weld down, laid down for these two tubes and make this axle housing actually stay put and stay strong, we're going to need to bevel both of those edges on there. Now, most of the time, we bevel them all the way down until they're just ready to just touch right there. But in this case, I want to make sure that they stay in alignment and they have enough face on each other to do that. And the way that we do that is by taking off not all of it, but we take it down to roughly 60 to 80% of it and leave a little bit on the inside there. But we Still enough to get a good solid penetrating weld. Now this is where we emphasize yet again on what being picky is all about. Dead on at 17 3/8. Dead on at 17 3/8. Now, we're going to end up tacking these two sides here. We're going to tack this side and we're going to tack this side. We're going to let them cool and we're going to measure again. If it doesn't line up after that, it means that there's distortion, there was warping on it. You have to cut tacks and redo it. Okay, there's no other way around it. Be picky, be patient. Ideally, yes, you're really awesome if you can nail it on the first try. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. But either way, we're going to tack on both sides first, then we're going to take this off, flip it up, compress it from the side, and tack the top and bottom, provided that the measurements are still correct. That's what we're going to get on right now. Okay, here we go. 17 3/8. 17 3/8. Those tacks were safe. If it did move, or it did distort, or it shifted, cut them off, reset it, redo it. Take your time, be patient. Do not mess around with this, because you really don't want to have, you know, like bearings fail or an axle snap or anything like that as you're plugging on down the road. That's just bad. So we're going to reset our clamps here. I'm going to flip this up with our welds on the top and bottom now, just so you don't get confused. We'll reset our clamps the exact same as before. We'll clamp them down nice and tight, and we'll check our measurement yet again. If it's off, we've got to cut it, we've got to fix it, we've got to change it. And actually make sure it's accurate, correct, true, all the rest of that good stuff. $17 3/8. So far, so good. Sometimes this makes me nervous. 17 3/8. Minimal gap. Minimal gap. Let's lay it down. One final check. Good there, 17 3/8. Good there at 17 3/8. We're solid. Now, just like before, distortion is a concern. It's something that we're going to have to address. So, just the same as before, on welding the axle tubes to the differential housing, we're going to weld in quadrants, and we're going to oppose our welds each time. So, starting with about 3 o'clock to 12 o'clock, then go 9 o'clock down to 6 o'clock, and then we'll flip-flop and go back again. Again, take your dear sweet time. If you really want to do a root and a cap, do a root and a cap. In this case, my filler rod's big enough, and I can lay down a really good solid bead in probably one pass. So that's what I'm going to stick with. It's only a 1/4 inch wall. the brother of a truck driving mother. Boogity boogity boogity. What are you laughing at? What? Smokey and the Bandit. Yeah. Okay. Back to seriousness. The moment of truth. Here we go. We gotta measure this thinger out. Finger out. Man, we gonna have a gag reel on here? All right. Outside of the differential housing to the outside of the flange that is machined nice and straight. Here we go. 17 3/8. So far, so good. 17 3/8. There's half of it. Keep the suspense alive here. 17 3/8, dead on the nose. Let's see, I'm gonna go backside. 17 3/8. That means I don't have to redo it. However, if you end up with different measurements or different results or it is skewed and you know it is skewed, be totally honest with yourself, cut that sucker back off and redo it. Seriously, because you don't want to be cooking this stuff or messing everything up as you're going down the road, especially if you're using it for racing purposes. You really want this to stay true. Now, I'm going to grab a hold of the grinder, take all this down, and we'll see how much maybe I need to fill back in. There's a couple spots here that look pretty sunken in there, so I just kind of want to make sure that you know, it stays nice and neat and even. And if I got to go over there and cap some of it, I'll do exactly that. Switch these out. Yep. We're sunk. Need to fix that one. All right, now we have two right side axles. Both of these are from the same side of the vehicle when we pulled it out of the junkyard. So, here's the side we already narrowed. Moment of truth. There's one. Give me some sugar. There we go. There's the other. Now, we're not going to get into the rest of the pieces that I have to put on here, like the 4-link brackets up in the chassis, all the rest of that good stuff, because that car isn't even ready. But what I'm going to do for you is just a little bit of an extra or an added bonus, because up to this point, that's the easiest thing. That's done. We're ready to roll. Just put it back together, rebuild it, all the rest of that good stuff. But just to give you an idea of how to measure and center something, I'm going to put the sway bar back on this one, and that's something you could easily follow along with. Okay, so the goal here is to get this sway bar back onto this rear axle, and that's not that difficult to do, but is a little challenging because we have to measure it and get it perfectly centered where it was not before, and we have some hurdles and little obstacles that we have to work around, but the math isn't terribly difficult. You just got to follow along, and I'll try to make it very easy to understand. Now, we need to know the total width of this axle. Now, we can't really measure across there because obviously this gear set's in the way or the actual differential housing is in the way. We can't get an accurate measurement because any time that we try to, we'd get a hump over it and we'll never get the exact number than it really needs to be. That's on any angle or any point that we actually try to measure it. So one of the easier things to do is take a couple of straight sections, like I have the pieces of channel here we used as our axle jig earlier, and I'm going to butt these up and kind of mate them right up to those mounting surfaces for where the brake shoe hardware was at. I'm going to measure down below where I can get a straight shot. 51 inches, that's our total width. It's actually 51 1/8, but we can actually knock it down and narrow it down a little bit. It's not going to matter because there is a little bit of play in these things. And we'll measure from outside to outside on our sway bar brackets. 29 inches is the outside to outside, but we need center to center. So we'll take the width of one flange here, which is 1 1/4 inches, and if you subtract 1 1/4 inches from 29, you'll get the center to center measurements. That comes out to 27 3/4 inches. Now, if we take the total width of the axle assembly as we measured, we got 51 inches, and we divide that by 2, we get 25 1/2, which brings us to the center of our axle assembly. Now, on the sway bar, we have a total width from center to center of 27 3/4 inches. If we divide that by 2, we get 13 7/8 inches. Now, that 13 7/8 can be added to the halfway point, or the 25 1/2, to get 39 3/8 inches. That 39 3/8 inches is the distance from here to the center of the tab on the opposing side. So if we measured from here to here, 39 3/8 inches, that'll tell us where the center is. And if we went from here to this side, 39 3/8 inches, that would be the center there. But the same problem we encountered earlier, where we couldn't actually measure all the way across here without bowing or anything getting in the way, we actually have to subtract that 39 3/8 from the total distance of 51. So 51 minus 39 3/8 is 11 5/8 inches. So from the outside flange, 11 5/8 inches will bring us right to the center of our perch where we need to install. This point right here, 11 5/8 inches, is the center. We'll measure that on both sides. 11 5/8. So this line here to this line here is the exact width of our sway bar, where it actually needs to be, where the perches need to go. But the perches are 2 inches wide. So 2 divided by 2 equals 1. And 1 inch offset is what we need to mark out on the axle tube, which tells us exactly where the edge of our perch needs to go. Now, I understand that math could be a little bit confusing because I did just kind of go right on through it. So if you have to run back over this, rewind, watch it again, and kind of follow along a little bit more closely, go for it. Now, to get these lined up and actually straight, I'm going to use the same channel iron to kind of square it off with the table here. And I'm just going to use a pony clamp to hold it in place while I tack weld it. Pretty simple. And there we have it. How to narrow a Ford 8.8. So you can see it's actually a relatively easy rear axle assembly to work with, and that's probably what makes it so popular, aside from the fact that it's extremely abundant. I mean, if you say you bust a part in the middle of a race, you can just run out of the junkyard and grab a new one and throw it in. Or if you need any kind of custom options, trust me, they're all available for the 8.8. There are so many of them to choose from. Now, that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this episode. I want to thank you guys for watching as always, and just again, make sure that you're subscribed and you ring that bell, because the viewers, you guys, actually chose this episode to be the next episode that I do. You voted. This is why it got done. Not to mention they get to see everything that goes on before the episode actually airs, including quite often seeing the episode before the rest of everybody else gets to see it. So make sure you subscribe and ring that bell. If you need to get in touch with us, hit us up on the fabricationseries.com website. Hit me up on Instagram at the.fabricator or facebook.com/thefabricatorseries. I want to thank you guys for watching as always. We'll see you guys on the next episode. Kind of like this diff.